Barreling into October, renewed COVID-19 fears in tow. What will Friday's non-farm jobs report tell the markets about the US economy? The markets are far more concerned about the pandemic, the threat of a second wave, and the related likelihood of a wider and more severe national lockdown than they have been for months. On top of this, the US tech sector is still on shaky ground after a blockbuster summer, and the US has the added headache of November's rapidly approaching election, the proximity of which appears to be stalling any hopes of a bipartisan COVID-19 spending plan. It has left investors clinging on to any piece of good news they can. For example, though most months the number would pass without much comment from the West, a 19.1% surge in industrial profits in China, taking the January to August year-on-year performance to just minus 4.4%, was reason for celebration on Monday. With investors desperately scrubbing around for positives then, what does this mean for Friday's non-farm jobs report? Well, after last week's flash PMI suggested a slowing economic recovery, the markets are now desperately seeking reassurances that it hasn't completely stalled. The headline non-farm employment change reading has been falling month on month, from a peak of 4.791 million jobs created in June to 1.734 million in July, and then in August, 1.371 million. At that pace of decline, September's figure could come in the wrong side of 1 million. Still an unprecedented figure for any other period, but a huge disappointment by current standards. In fact, analysts are expecting a reading of just 900,000, which is cause for concern given that the number of jobs lost back in March and April still is nowhere near being clawed back by the gains made across the summer. Another element to watch is the unemployment rate. Avoiding the spike to 19.4% forecast back in May, it currently stands at 8.4% at the last count, with a far greater than forecast drop from 10.2% the month previous. If this starts to creep up, however, it could cause a wave of alarm from investors. Analysts are looking for another minor decrease, however, to 8.2%. Anything faster than that obviously could help offset the disappointment of that sub 1 million non-farm headline reading. Before we get to that, the final few days of September see the CB consumer confidence number on Tuesday, followed on Wednesday by the final look at the Q2 GDP number, which last estimate showed a 31.7% contraction at the annualized rate, alongside the ADP non-farm pending home sales and Chicago PMI figures. October opens on Thursday with the core PCE price index, jobless claims and final market and ISM manufacturing PMIs, while Friday is the factory orders and revised consumer sentiment numbers during the jobs report. Investors would also do well to keep an eye on September's Chinese manufacturing and services PMIs in the early hours of Wednesday morning as a potential pace setter to how the month will close out. That is given extra emphasis by the fact that how positive the markets have reacted to the Chinese industrial profits numbers from over the weekend. Figures that, as mentioned, normally would go by without much comment. The other big thing will be the bipartisan COVID-19 spending plan. I think the last report was that Democrats had offered up a plan of, I think it's $2.4 trillion, which is far higher than both the $1.4 trillion Donald Trump had seemed to suggest he'd be open to, and then the $1 trillion cap that Republicans have set as their own cap. Any movement on that, I think, is still the biggest news the markets could receive to the positive, given that the COVID-19 situation is worsening, especially in Europe. Any positive signs on the spending plan would be huge news for the markets, though given the gap between the Republicans and Democrats and the fact that the election is only around 5 weeks away now, that could be an actual agreement and an actual spending plan could be still hard to come by. And, the longer that goes on, you see these flare-ups and negativity from the markets as they're reminded of the fact that both sides are still far apart on arguably the single key thing for America and the American economic recovery at the moment.